Shino Academy's Class 1 dormitory. A ray of sunlight passed through the window of a room. Laying down on the bed, Gojo frowned before opening his jewel-like blue eyes. Getting up, he stretched a little before looking to his side. There, lying next to him was a naked girl. The library girl. Her naked and enticing body in full display. She was quite short, and he had to admit that she lacked some of the curves he liked in women, but she was quite cute, and it wasn't as if he was searching for a long-lasting relationship. Even when he was alive, he had many such relationships with different girls. Her full name was Hotaru Kanazawa, a 6th-year student and quite skilled from what she said. At least, it seemed that she was one of the top 3 students. Even though Gojo was quite full of himself, he was at first a little surprised at how easy it had been. Even though it might have broken the mood, he asked her why she had been so accepting, and the reason had been quite startling. For one, she was already about 400 years old, so she had less hang up. What's more, a few days ago she had just participated in a mission where 4 out of 10 official Shinigami died. So she had been feeling quite stressed. In a way, you could say that he had simply been at the right time and the right place. The fact that he had slept with a 300-years-old woman aside, her confession about the reality of death left him silent. He wasn't new to such realities. After all, few jujutsu sorcerers managed to die out of old age. It seemed that he had woken her up, as her eyes trembled for a short while before slowly opening. She seemed a little lost at first, before blushing fiercely when she remembered the wild night she had. She had never thought that she could be so wanton in bed. It had been about 200 years since the last time she had any sexual relationships, but even then, she had never felt like this. Yo! She gave a rather awkward laugh before turning her head to the side. Put your clothes on, please. Gojo on the other hand simply put his hands on his hips and stood proudly. Why? I have nothing to feel ashamed of. By the way, we should still have time before class, right? What do you think of another round? She hesitated for a little while before nodding. She didn't have any illusion about this relationship of theirs. Nor did she wish for anything. But, letting go from time to time didn't seem like a bad thing. Soon, moans of delight once again resounded in the room. 1 hour later, a still flushed Hotaru was wearing her uniform. Her legs were still shaking from the previous fight with Gojo, and she was once again blown away by how good it had felt. Thankfully, each room was equipped with a bathroom, so she was able to wash all the sweat and dubious liquid covering her body. While she was tidying up her hair, she suddenly said, "Before I forget, in about 1 or 2 months, me and my 2 comrades will be tasked to lead the first-year student of Class 1 in the real world for a special course about soul burial. There will also be a surprise exam about hunting hollows, but those are only dummies. The 3 of us will grade you." Oh? Gojo, who was still half-naked, raised his eyebrow. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing you should say, right? Hotaru simply turned her head aside and said, "It doesn't really matter. As long as you don't say it to anyone else, it will be alright." Gojo chuckled. "Thanks, I appreciate it." Coming closer to her, he lowered himself and kissed her on the forehead. "You can come to me anytime you feel stressed." She blushed fiercely and mumbled, "Idiot," before opening the door in a rush and leaving his room. Once she left, Gojo shook his head before putting the top of his clothes on, then put on his blindfold before walking out. Once outside of his room, he looked at the corner of the hallway before calling someone out. "Momo, how long do you plan to hide?" A blushing Momo walked out of the corner, her face steaming out. I am sorry, I didn't mean to peep or anything. I just wanted to wake you up and show you the way. I came not too long ago." The dormitory wasn't separated by gender, only by class and year. After all, no one here was a child. Gojo knew that she was lying. He had felt her presence outside of his door for about 40 minutes. But he didn't want to call her on that. It isn't a problem. Anyway, what class do we have again? This question seemed to snap her out of her daze. Zenjutsu. You guys will receive your Asachi. Asachi, huh? He looked at the sword hanging on her waist. From what he had seen, basically all Asachi looked the same, and even those that looked different weren't truly that much different. Just some difference in length or width. From what he understood, this difference was mostly because of the difference in the amount and quality of Ryuryoku. But having a bigger sword didn't mean that you were stronger. He still remembered quite clearly that the sword Soifon had was very short. This showed that the length and width of a sword were more about energy control and personal style. It would be quite funny if some newbie was considered strong just because he had a sword bigger than most people. Shino Academy, training ground. The moment Gojo entered the training ground, he was surprised by how large and well furnished it was. A large field equal to 2 football stadiums equipped with training dummies, targets, a track course, a zone for resting, and many such things. When he remembered that this was just the ground for Hakuta, Senjutsu, and Hoho, he couldn't help but imagine what the Kido training field looked like. At the center of the field, a large line could be seen slowly advancing, each of the people in it receiving something one after another. Yo! Man, what took you so long? I thought you two got lost on the way. A red-haired man who was watching with a bored expression next to a black-haired woman perked up the moment Gojo and Momo entered. Ha ha. Sorry, I was a little, let's say busy. Momo had to wait for me. Momo lowered her head in shame when she remembered the reason why Gojo was busy. Oh. Renji was a little surprised at Momo's reaction but didn't pay much attention to it. Anyways, you should line up to take your Asachi. Kira took a place behind Hitsugaya to help you. Well, this is good and all, but could you introduce us to your friend? Gojo looked at the short black-haired woman as he said this. In terms of height, his eyes, even though blindfolded, told him that the woman standing in front of him was nothing more than 144 centimeters tall, which, when compared to his 190 centimeters or Renji 188 centimeters, seemed ridiculously small. Oh? Do you mean this small girl? Her name is Rukia. She is an old friend of mine. Renji shrugged as he introduced the girl. Though, from the way she stomped on the ground, it seemed that she didn't appreciate. Small? Monkey face. I am not small. Okay? It isn't my fault if you guys are so ridiculously tall. What's more, I am still growing. Renji snickered, growing? Wake up, please. It has already been 100 years since we've known each other. Pretty sure this is it for you. Watching the two fight like this, Gojo smiled gently. Lifting the corner of his blindfold, he stretched his hand toward Rukia. I feel like I said it too many times already, but the name is Satoru Gojo. Happy to meet you, Rukia. So, I have a question. Shaking hands with Gojo, Rukia tilted her head, go on. When is the marriage between you and him? Gojo never thought that a face could turn as red as a tomato so fast. A few minutes after escaping from Rukia's shame-fueled, but useless hits since she couldn't even touch him, Gojo was standing behind Toshiro as he waited for their turn to receive a sword. From what he understood, after receiving the Asachi, it was necessary to inject your Ryuryoku in it for an initial synchronization. Once this was done, years of constant contact and slow nurturing were necessary to finally hear the name of the Asachi. Even then, aside from seated officers, few official Shinigami could awaken the name of their Zanpakuto, much less students like them. At least this was supposed to be the reality. Finally, it was Toshiro's turn to take his Asachi. But the moment he began to inject his Ryuryoku into it, for a very short amount, so short that nearly no one caught it, the temperature around them suddenly dropped. Gojo trusted his senses more than anything, and he knew what they were telling him. This lowering in the temperature had been unnatural, and he knew the culprit. It hadn't been that visible to the others, but the moment Toshiro filled the sword with his Ryuryoku, it wasn't just his energy that entered it, but also what looked like a part of his own self. So this is how the spirit of a Zanpakuto is born. He could deduce from this that Zanpakuto were born from the soul of their owner. This is getting interesting. So those things are a little like Yuji and Sukuna? No, this is closer to the relationship between Yuta and Rika. When he was alive, aside from Yuji, who had initially swallowed a part of the King of Curse and became its vessel, he had another student. Yuta. Yuta was linked to an extremely powerful curse spirit that Gojo had named as the Queen of Curses, and she was born from Yuta's own cursed power and the spirit of his dead childhood friend. Thinking about how all his star pupils always had troublesome situations, and a weird tendency toward being executed by the higher-up, he could only sigh. Well, with a teacher like me, how could my students be any less awesome? Gojo thought smugly as he patted Toshiro's shoulder and stood in front of the man giving the sword. Name and class. Gojo Satoru, Class 1. Take your sword and inject your Ryuryoku like the others. Taking the ordinary-looking katana, Gojo observed the weapon curiously before filling it with his Ryuryoku. He felt the same thing happening to him as it happened to Toshiro. A small part of him fused with the sword before it fell silent. Swinging a little the sword, he put it back in its sheath and left. In all the history of the Soul Society, he might have been the one who ported the least interest to his sword. For him, this Zanpakuto wasn't any different from a cursed tool or cursed spirit manipulation. Having it was nice and all, and it could have some nice effects. But this wasn't something he really needed. The following day, Gojo followed the usual group, though without Rukia this time since it wasn't a shared course, to the Kido training ground. The previous day, after getting their Zanpakuto, they had just been given basic training such as swinging the sword again and again almost mindlessly. Gojo had never been a swordmaster. After all, he never had the need to wield any weapons in the first place. But this didn't mean that he was a beginner either. After all, one of his students, because of the lack of cursed energy, had needed to become extremely proficient in cursed weapons wielding. How could he keep his head high as a teacher if he wasn't even able to give some help to his students? Still, despite all his arrogance, he never belittled the necessity to understand the basics, and that's why he didn't riot even though the task was super boring. Those guys should do like me and find better ways to entertain the students while they train. He snickered at the thought of the training regiment he had concocted for Yuji when he was still a newbie. Gojo? Momo asked after hearing him. Sorry, I'm just thinking about how cute Rinji and Rukia were. Though I am a little disappointed in Rinji. On the side, he could see Rinji stiffen a little at this. What do you mean? Gojo turned toward him for a short while then shook his head. I won't stick my nose in your love story, dude. You do as you like. Rinji clenched his fist before lowering his head. He knew what Gojo was alluding to. He had thought that he was able to hide his feelings quite well, but he must have been wrong if someone he just met 2 days ago could see it. The atmosphere cooled down a little, but Gojo did not particularly care. Rinji did indeed disappoint him a little. He had never been in love, but he understood how feelings such as love and friendship should be treasured more than anything else. After all, be it in his world or the afterlife, there was nothing easier than losing the people you cared for. This rule held even more so for people like them who were training to fight. Rather than wallowing in self-doubt and hesitations, you should take the hand of the person you love and never let go no matter what. Well, not like it matters to me. Rinji wasn't his friend. For Gojo, he was just a funny dude that could help him pass time. Why would he waste his time by thinking about the personal problems of someone he had just met? E/N, you should care about how to fix his damn eyebrows like TF? Keto Training Ground? The Keto Training Ground was more like a shooting ground than anything else. Facing the students was a stern black-haired woman seemingly in her early 20s. Her outfit was composed of a black kimono and a badge with the title Vice Captain on her shoulder as well as a pair of glasses. The moment they saw her, the students began to cause a ruckus. Hello everyone, I am Nanao Ise, a special lecturer. Normally I only teach the 6th year students in my spare time, but today I decided to teach the 1st years. Her voice was calm and a little chilly as she adjusted her glasses, and if Gojo wasn't wrong, she had turned to look at him when she said the last line. The teacher who was supposed to teach them today advanced and said, "You guys should be happy to receive this privilege. Miss Ise is the vice captain of the 8th division as well as a Keto expert. 50 years ago, when she was a student, she had enough credit to enter the Keto Corps and was specifically scouted by the captain of the 8th division, Shunsui Kairaku. Man, this guy is the ultimate definition of bootlicker. Well, I guess with credentials like this, she is really worthy of it." Gojo thought in amusement. Meanwhile, even though she kept a straight face, Nanao felt like her face was burning. She had always hated such excessive praise. After all, the reason she was so good at Keto was just that she had no other choice since she was unable to bond with another Zanpakuto aside from their inherited one. As for being specially scouted, that damn old man was her own uncle. So she had nothing to feel proud of. Sigh, anyway, so this is my target. Looking at the blindfolded silver-haired man, she had to admit that even though she wasn't particularly interested in having any form of relationship with a man, he was quite handsome. The reason she had decided to teach the 1st years this time was because she had been quite curious about the man that had caused a small stir in the Siriidii before even entering it. More than anything, the part about how he had been able to learn Keto just by watching was something that made her really curious, though also a little jealous. Keto was a profound art in few Shinigami, even if the captain level could be said to reach the expert level, much less the level of master. As such, for someone like him to exist was something she had to verify for herself. Okay everyone, some of you already have some understanding, but I will still begin with the basics. Wait for me to finish before asking any questions. Understood? Yes. Satisfied with the response, she began to explain. Keto is an intricate practice that requires a deep understanding in Ryoryoku and Ryatsu manipulation. Over the long history of Keto, we have managed to subdivide it into 3 great types. The way of destruction, Heido. The way of binding, Bakudo, and the way of healing, Kaido. Our western branch simply calls them magic spells. But well, those guys still aren't properly established. A western branch? Well it's understandable. It would be weird for the afterlife to only belong to Asia. Gojo thought while listening to Nanao. Kaido aside, each Heido and Bakugo are numbered, and the higher the number, the more powerful it is. Of course, this wasn't all, there were also some Keto outside of those 3 that were known as Forbidden Keto. But no way she was going to talk about it to the students. After all, she liked having her head on her shoulders. Remembering how her mother had been executed because she broke some nonsensical law, her mood dampened. In order to use a Keto, 3 steps are necessary. Visualizing the spell, chanting the spell, and naming the spell. Well, let me show a mid-grade Heido as an illustration. At this, she turned to face one of the targets standing about 100 meters away from her. Ye Lord. Mask of blood and flesh, all creation, flutter of wings, ye who bears the name of man. Inferno and pandemonium, the sea barrier surges, march on to the south. Kado number 31 Shikaho. A red ball of fire formed in her hand before being launched like a laser beam. The effects had been limited, but it had completely obliterated the target. While the others were astonished at the power, Gojo on the other couldn't help but have his smile cramp a little when she chanted her spell out loud. Even though the effects were pretty incredible, the problem wasn't here. I will freeze in hell before I am heard chanting a spell like this. He seriously wondered if the ones who created those keto spells didn't suffer from Shinibu syndrome. Nanao, who didn't know what Gojo was thinking, continued her lecture. Of course, you should understand that most enemies won't just stand there like this target and let you finish. You need to be fast on your feet and use different ways of incantation. But the easiest is without a doubt simply foregoing the incantation altogether. Though, the higher the level the harder it is. Kado number 31 Shikaho. She once again launched the same spell, though it was clearly weaker, as you can see. The drawback of using a spell without the incantation is a loss of power. So, any questions? Momo raised her hand and asked, I searched for some Kaido spell in my spare time, but they were very hard to find. What's more, as you said, they weren't numbered, why is it? Nanao nodded, I am unable to answer this question. To be honest, Kaido isn't even in your lesson as only the 4th division can teach it. If you are interested in healing, you just need to reach a good enough level in Bakudo and you will be accepted. Next. This time it was Gojo who asked, so, is it possible to not use Aikido without uttering a word? Nanao frowned, to be honest, those able to do so are rare. Those who use Kido are divided into 3 ranks. Practitioners, experts, and masters. In the whole Suriidii, out of all the current captains, I only know 5 who are at the level of master and only those at this level would be able to do what you asked. Oh? And is it possible to know who those 5 are? It isn't a problem. The first one and most powerful is the Captain Commandant, the second one is Captain Unohana of the 4th Division. The third one is Captain Jinrei Kuchiki of the 6th Division. Then Captain Ishin Shiba of the 10th and finally Captain Yukitake of the 13th. At the end of the lecture, as students left one another. Student Satoru Gojo. Stay please. Nanao Ayase called for Gojo to stop as he was walking with Hinamori and the gang. Stopping, he shrugged before saying, you guys continue. I will talk with the charming lady. Smiling, he waved his hand before sauntering toward Nanao. Hello hello. To what do I owe the pleasure? Nanao frowned a little at the way he talked while wondering why all the geniuses she knew had such weird personalities. Good morning Mr. Gojo, I called you because I was curious about something. Could you reproduce the spell I just used as a demonstration? She said as she indicated towards the shooting range. She was really curious. Was he really able to do as was said? Oh. Gojo tilted his head for a short while, before smiling as understanding dawned upon him. I could. Of course, I could. But why should I? His earlier frivolous tone vanished as his demeanor became way more serious. Even though he was still smiling, Nanao instinctively knew that he wasn't playing around. This abrupt change was a little sudden and she was taken aback as she asked, did I offend you? He looked at her up and down before shaking his head, and answered again with a voice full of mirth, nah, sorry. Seems like I was just being a little too sensitive. He was not a circus monkey that would perform at the demand of the public. In all his life, he had seen so many people act like this around him that he was sick of this. But, it seemed that it had been a misunderstanding. Deciding to lighten the atmosphere, he condensed a little ball of Ryuryoku above his finger, so, let's go back to the previous topic. I do not mind showing off a little to a beautiful woman, but I need a little something. Nanao nodded, what do you wish? Though I must just warn you that I do not have much money on me. Oh, this isn't a problem at all. I don't want your money. Then, what? Raising his blindfold, he showed a charming smile as he said, what I want is. If you say something stupid like what I want is you, I am going to slap you. She said this in such a matter-of-fact way that Gojo's smile cramped. Slumping a little, he couldn't help but ask, how did you see this coming? Nanao sighed as she shook her head. How could she tell him that she regularly heard such stupid and corny jokes almost every day from her captain? What's more, she had long sworn off of any form of relationship. She didn't wish to be yet another woman who made her loved one suffer because of the curse of the ISE clan. So, what do you wish in exchange for showing your skills? Releasing a sigh, Gojo completely took off his blindfold as he said, you are really no fun. But it doesn't matter. I wasn't joking when I said that I wanted you. More precisely. Pointing at the target, he murmured, Kado number 31 Shikaho. A fire beam, as powerful as the one launched by Nanao when she used the full incantation, was fired from his finger and thoroughly obliterated the target. Turning his back to the explosion, he gave his brightest smile as he said, "I want your skills, your knowledge, your know-how. Absolutely everything about you. What do you think?" Looking at the man standing in front of her, Nanano couldn't help but feel a chill. At the same time, she couldn't help but wonder. How far could he go? How powerful could he become? "That's why, without even stopping to think," she answered, "I will teach you everything I know." She knew that her curiosity could cause her many problems down the road. But she couldn't let go of the opportunity to train a genius like him. Perhaps she could witness the birth of another master level in Kido. After this event, 2 weeks went past. And a short chapter. But I just didn't have time back then when I wrote it back. Anyway, enjoy. Next chapter will be pretty long. 2 weeks seemed like a short time, but in reality, so many things could happen in that time frame. The first thing of note was how the fame of Gojo was continuously growing in the academy. More precisely, he was becoming more and more infamous as a problem student. The cause for this? Aside from the first 3 days of class where he followed the introduction of all the basic arts dutifully, he immediately became a truant not long after. He discarded all classes aside from the homeroom and general knowledge class, and even during those classes, he would either be sleeping or reading a book while the lecture was going on. Today was supposed to be a class about Ho-Ho and Hakuta for the first year. Those two classes were generally held by the same professor since the techniques were about using Ryuryoku to empower the body in fight. The lecturer, Kairo Fan, had always been proud of his place and the course he taught. After all, most Shinigami never awakened their Zanpakuto. Meanwhile, very few Shinigami were really interested or had the talent for Kido. But Hakuta and Ho-Ho? Those skills were basically the most fundamental skills necessary for survival on the battlefield. For him, those two skills were the noblest ones. That's why, as a member of the noble Fan family, he couldn't accept this student. Satoru Gojo. He bellowed with clear anger in his voice. His gaze, directed on the student lying down on the grass, seemed to spit fire. Yawning, Satoru stretched for a little while before standing up. "Hello, teach. What brings you to me on such a beautiful morning?" His nonchalant answer nearly made Kairo have a stroke. Taking a deep breath, he continued in a calmer tone, "Student Satoru Gojo. Explain to me, why did you not come to class today?" Gojo lowered his black glasses as he stood up. Those glasses had been made for him after he explained his needs. Like his pair on Earth, they were nearly opaque for anyone but him. Looking at the prof, he sighed as he said, "You are a good professor. But your class ain't for me." Gojo was serious. Even though some of the noble students looked down on the commoners from the Rukongai, there was no outright bullying or conflict. It was easy to understand. The nobles had no control over the Gotei 13, and it wasn't uncommon for people of the Rukongai to become seated officers. No smart noble would bother someone who could potentially become someone great. The same went for the professors. Even though many of them were nobles, they did not treat the students differently. The man in front of him was a dedicated teacher who, aside from an excessive pride in what he taught, didn't have any bad traits. Gojo understood that the man was acting in justified anger, but this did not change his opinion on the matter. "Teach, I will be honest with you. There's really nothing I can learn from you anymore." Shuunpa was a very impressive art. It was so impressive that it was frightening. In his free time, meaning every time he ditched class, he had researched the feats of some of the present and past captains in the Soul Society, and all he could say was one word. Badass. One of the greatest feats of speed he read was a technique derived from the Shuunpa called speed clone. Realistically speaking, for a human to create a speed clone with basically no blur, they would have to move at about Mach 3 at minimum. In the information he obtained, it seemed that Soifan was able to produce more than 10 clones at the same time. He shuddered just at the thought of the speed necessary for such a feat. If he had fought against her back then, Rikugen or not, she would have wiped the floor with him. Now though, well, at least I should have a chance to fight without being humiliated. He was thinking so when from the corner of his eyes, he could see the teacher use Shuunpa. Compared to the inexperienced mobs of the 2nd Division who he fought previously, he was clearly much faster. Still, too slow. He easily avoided and moved behind the teacher while sending a hit. Blocking it with his arms, Kairo immediately grabbed Gojo's fist and sent another punch. Even though it was quite an awkward position, Gojo didn't try to avoid the punch but rather countered with one of his own. Just as it was about to connect, a grin formed on his face. Black flash. Black lightning gathered on his fist while the air itself seemed to explode from the release of power. Kairo's expression changed. He knew that if their punch connected in this situation, losing his arm would be the least of his worries. But just as it was about to happen, he received a low kick from Gojo and was propelled a few meters away from him. Hee hee. Seems like I won. Giving a V sign of victory, he grinned before walking away. Wait. What is it, Teach? You want another bout? Cairo didn't answer the taunt. His expression looked as if he had seen a ghost. That Hakuta technique. Who taught you it? He was extremely surprised at Gojo's skills in Shunpa. But that last technique. No one taught me. Impossible. You mean you created it yourself? Hee hee. In a way, you could say so. Copyright could go fuck itself. It wasn't like the creator of Black Flash could come to complain, right? Well, Teach, I should have shown you that I really don't need to follow your class. So see ya. I have a date with a beautiful girl wearing glasses. Waving his hand, he began to walk away before stopping. Also Teach, this isn't Hakuta, but Jujitsu. Jujitsu. Cairo murmured the weird name while sinking deep in thoughts. That technique he used, he couldn't be mistaken, it was eerily similar to another technique he knew the existence of. Shunko. It was the highest form of Hakuta. A technique that fused Hakuta and Kido and produced a powerful gust of winds covering the arms and back of the user. A technique created and developed by the current captain Soifan. E/N, Yoruchi wants to claim copyright. Even though there were some differences, the similarities were too great to ignore. I need to report it to Captain Soifan. Gojo, who did not know about the existence of Shunko, was humming quite happily. During those 2 weeks, thanks to Nanao's lessons, his knowledge of Kido had continued to grow steadily. What's more, she had taught him all the Heido and Bakudo from number 1 to number 60. Even though she had mastered up to number 70, she had refused to teach him those techniques since only seated officers had the right to learn Heido above 60. Since Gojo didn't want to create problems for his benefactor, he didn't insist and began the process of creating Jujitsu in the Soul Society. For this, Black Flash and Divergent Fist had been the ones he chose as an experiment. While Divergent Fist was just a crude release of cursed energy. Black Flash was a more intricate technique that required an extreme control of cursed energy. Black Flash was a technique that created spatial distortion when a user connects with an impact of cursed energy within 0.000001 seconds of a physical hit. The phenomenon causes cursed power to flash black. Because of this stringent requirement, even when he was alive, he was never able to maintain or use continuously Black Flash. At the same time, he had never really tried hard, since he simply did not need this technique when he was alive. Finally, that technique only brought a 2.5 times increase in strength. For people like Yuji who already had insane physical strength. Black Flash was like giving wings to a tiger. But for him, it had been useless, at least when he was alive. Feeling the tingles in his arms, he couldn't help but smirk. Ryuryoku is really superior to cursed technique. The increase brought by his Black Flash was far above what he had expected. About 5 times. This was simply insane. The best? This isn't the limit. What made him really happy wasn't Black Flash itself, but the realization that any cursed technique he used with Ryuryoku would be far stronger than the original version. If so, what would happen when I managed to recreate Limitless? He shivered in excitement just at the thought.